Okay, so I set this up as a live because I've never done a live before, and I'm not sure what the traffic is gonna work like. But normally I would just do an episode on this and figure if um, we can make it live and potentially get an audience who can respond real time, then that works. If not, then I can still use this the way I normally would, which is just as a vlog. So this is the second show I've done on Kevin Samuels. The first one was a pure reaction video, um, finding out that he had passed, and I wanted to um, basically talk about um, Kevin Samuels and some of the key highlights of his show and just how much I enjoy the show. There were a lot of negative comments that came out about Kevin, and I didn't really think that that was fair. Seeing people dancing on his grave now that he couldn't defend himself, celebrating his passing. Um, say what you want about him. There's just there's a certain level of class I think you have to kind of recognize, for a person who's a son, who's a father, and whose family's just learning about his passing. I think that's a pretty tough spot to put those family members in. Um, I don't know. I don't know what I would do, how I would respond to finding out that a loved one had passed because I was hearing someone making fun of it. That would be a really hard. That would be a really hard pill to have to swallow. Um, but part of what I wanted to do with this show was kind of keep the momentum going and talking about Kevin and what he's done. Uh, there are going to be detractors. There are going to be people out there who are going to spew a lot of hate. There are going to be people out there who just, are happy that someone who they disagreed with has passed so that they don't have to justify um, some of their decisions, some of their behaviors, some of the truths that he was shedding a light on about people, could be uncomfortable, and they don't have to defend that anymore. They don't necessarily have to defend against that. At least that's the thinking. There's a celebration because this person who was making me feel uncomfortable is gone. And I think that the discomfort is going to be gone with them. But I think that, I and most of the internet, well, most of the people who were fans of Kevin Samuels, let me say, are going to be looking for the next thought leader who steps into this space and speaks to the issues that Kevin did. Um, he was remarkable in his ability to encourage a conversation about some very tough truths. And that's part of what I want this show to focus on is how Kevin really advanced things, how our situations, how the conversations between black men and women, while probably more uncomfortable now than they had been, um, are more truthful, are more focused, and how we're in a better place now because we're at least able to really sort of talk about what some of the problems are. Maybe we don't agree on the solutions. Maybe we don't necessarily agree on what the problems are. But the big idea is that now we're talking about it, we're having the conversation. And that's one of the most important things to celebrate about Kevin is that he got us to start talking, which basically puts us on a road to fixing some of the problems that we have. Now, speaking from a very personal standpoint, I noticed Kevin at just a really interesting time in my life. I had, it was during COVID. I noticed Kevin last year. So Average at Best and Art had already been out. And I was at this very odd place in life. I'd been running a business for a few years, but through COVID, pretty much lost my clients and had started working for another company. I was having to really think through a lot of things that were going on in my life. There was basically this whole loss of control that I wasn't happy about. Um, I was kind of going out with someone, wasn't ecstatic about it. Basically, you looked at all of the things that were happening in my life. There was just a lot of dissatisfaction with how much was happening that was out of my control and how basically useless is the wrong word, how powerless I was feeling about where things were going. Listening to Kevin, really started to remind me of the things that I had done that I did really enjoy, that I had really taken pride in, and that I did love, and helped me to think about how to really focus on getting back to being me, so to speak. Um, Over COVID, everybody talks about gaining their COVID 15s. I was just like everybody else. And looking at myself in the mirror every day and thinking, wow, I've really let myself go. Looking at my job situation where I once was a business owner, and now I was just an employee. Thought, my career, things aren't really headed the way they're not heading to where I thought they were going to be heading. And this woman who I was going out with, who was always hinting at what felt like a very one-sided relationship. Her, wanting to eventually find someone to marry, eventually get herself into a long-term relationship. She and her two kids. There were just a lot of things that I thought weren't going well. None of the major efforts in my life felt like it was going well. I wasn't happy about. I wasn't excited about what my career was doing for me, because even though this new job I had was great, it was going to require me to move, and I wasn't looking forward to it since my daughter. I have a child, and I was going to be moving to the other side of the country, which meant that I wasn't going to be seeing her as much. So there was just a lot that um, I was thinking through, a lot that I was feeling disappointed about. But then I heard Kevin, and it came through with this whole average at best episode. And what was so interesting was just the refreshing honesty that I got to hear as Kevin was talking to women about this particular woman, about her situation. Kind of saying, you're a woman who, thin. You're not bad looking, but you're not smoking hot. You've got a kid that you had when you were really young, and you have these expectations that you're going to find a guy who's, you know, doing extremely well and who's going to want to partner with you. Among all the women he could choose from, you seem to think that this guy is going to choose you. And it's funny because, you know, financially being in the situation that he's talking about, being, a high earner, I thought, yeah, Kevin's not explaining anything that's untrue. He's not saying anything that isn't going through my head, that I would doubt would be going through the head of any of my peers. I mean, he's telling it like it is. And it was shocking to see the response to somebody who basically just told the truth and said, lady, you're average at best. You're nothing special. You want a guy who's special, but you're not special. So how do you think you're going to land him? That's the piece where I felt like Kevin was the most misunderstood. He wasn't placing judgments on women, but he was helping, trying to help them understand that if they wanted these high earners were going to place some judgments on them. And the internet just lost its mind about that. I don't I don't think there's much controversy. It's very controversial to say that a woman who doesn't have kids is a better option than a woman who does. A woman with one kid's a better option than a woman with two. A younger woman's a better option than an older one. A woman who's fit is a better option than a woman who's overweight. All of the things that he was saying were true, were factually correct. And as you listened, what you realized was that there was this difference in the standards people had for how women and men communicated. If you're a guy, if you're a woman, start it that way, you can say what you want. You can use whatever tone you want. You can be as cold and cruel and condescending as pleases you, and that's fine. We become a culture that decided that that was acceptable and that was the norm. But if you were a guy, you had to walk on eggshells. You had to be as polite and sensitive and tactful as possible. And to see someone who said, "Mm, I'm going to challenge that," that was so refreshing. When you listen to Kevin's tone and average at best, he's not really being rude, not really being impolite. This is a guy who's basically saying, hey, guess what? You're not all that special. And compared to the tone, think about the tone of the women who were responding to that episode right when it came out. And ask yourself, what was more what was more harsh? Kevin's tone with that woman, or all the other women's tone when they were attacking Kevin? I mean, women were trying to cancel him for basically saying, hey, lady, you're not that special. That was too much for them to handle. And that was reflective of the way our culture had seemed to be moving. You had guys who weren't in relationships, um, not because they didn't want to be, but because they couldn't find good options. And all the while, the rhetoric seemed to be black women talking about how black men are trash. There are no good black men left. There are all these statistics that are horribly overblown, and it didn't feel fair. It wasn't fair, but it didn't feel like there was really any way to do anything about it. You had to quietly decide: am I going to focus on trying to make things work with a black woman? Or am I going to go find someone else because I don't think it's worth the effort of trying to deal with um, all of the baggage that seems to come with black women in those relationships? And you see it reflected in our numbers. You know, black men are less racially loyal than other races. Not significantly so. I mean that gets overblown. It's a slight difference, but it does exist. The story had always been, black men, what's wrong with you? But what Kevin was saying was, well, wait a minute. Instead of asking why black men are leaving, why don't we start asking why black men are leaving? Nobody really wants to address that question. Everyone seems to feel like black women are owed these relationships with black men. But that's not fair to black men who want good relationships and feel like they can't find them in their own community. Why don't we want to talk about that? That really started to change conversations because starting with Kevin, people were able to start asking questions that had been swept under the rug before. Most notably, the question was, why would the guy you want you? What do you bring to the table? It's the rephrasing of it. But fundamentally, it's you've got a long list of things that you want from a man. Did you ever stop to think that that man's going to have a list of things he wants from you? And if we start to match them up, well, how many men do you think meet all of these criteria? And if you find one of them miraculously, how likely do you think it is that that man is going to choose you? I mean, let's face it. A guy who's making $250,000 a year, 40 years old, is looking at a woman with a plain face who's overweight, or a woman who and 40, or who's pretty and more fit and younger. On those facts alone, the younger woman is the better option. Women didn't like to hear that, but that's the truth. Kevin was confronting people with the truth, and it drove people insane. I loved the smoke shows that he used to hold. Um, they became less interesting over time, but that was only because well, the smoke shows were designed to give people the chance to argue with him about anything he said. Like, I'm taking on all comers. You come in here, you disagree with something I'm saying, you let me know what it is. I'm more than happy to defend my positions with you. And he left the world wide open, left the doors wide open, invited everybody in. Tons of people came in to have debates with him, but people weren't debating the facts. What people ended up debating was the style of delivery. You don't like his tone. You don't like how he's condescending. You don't like how abrupt he can be. But you're not disagreeing with what he's saying. So now we're talking about style. And who cares about style? Because if he's delivering the truth, then we need to be starting with that and saying that what he's saying is true and accurate and beneficial. The interesting thing, though, is that it goes deeper than that and saying, well, is his style any different than the style we're hearing from women who are destroying black men, destroying the black male image? That point in time, it felt like every chance you get, there's someone else who's out here tearing the black male image down. And there wasn't really an argument against that. Like, well, women are doing it. So why is it a problem if men are doing it too? Nobody had an answer to that. It was more just a matter of saying guys shouldn't be able to play in this space. Women can do whatever we want. We're sacred. We're beyond reproach. But as men, we can't do whatever we want. Kevin stopped that argument short. For me, that was so beneficial because it changed the way I started looking at what was going on in my life. Helped me to start looking at some real truths about, kind of my life and what I wanted to get out of it and what I needed to be doing about it. One of the things that was a byproduct of Kevin was just me saying, you know what? I've let myself go. If I'm not happy about my dating options right now, I need to stop and take a look at what I'm doing. I need to start asking questions about what I should be doing to get better. Um, Looking at myself and realizing that I let myself gain weight. I'd let myself get out of shape. I realized, you know what? I'm not as good an option as I used to be, and I need to do something about that. And that's on me. I'm not going to sit here and criticize overweight women for wanting guys that are way above their fighting weight when I'm sitting here, basically doing the same thing. And that got me not back into the gym because I'd been going, but that got me to really take things seriously. Going to the gym wasn't about hanging out and getting in a 30-minute workout that wasn't all that effective just to, feel better about myself. It was about accomplishment. Like, I've got things I want to accomplish with these workouts. I've got weight goals. I've got waistline goals. I've got things that I want to see, and I'm putting a more concerted effort into going after what I want, as opposed to just sitting here and saying that I'm just going to go with the flow. From a career standpoint, it lit more of a fire under me to say, you know what? I had a business. And yeah, sure, COVID came in and it killed my client base. But at the end of the day, I've been here before. I know what it's like to have to start with no clients. I know the work it takes to build them up. I don't like the thought of necessarily having to start over, but I need to decide, do I want to try to rebuild or do I just want to give up? Fire was lit. And I thought, thank you, Kevin. This has helped me to kind of remember what it was like to not feel useless. It helped me to remember what it was like to want to take control of my situation and say, what can I do to get better? Um, and with the relationships, I mean, we kind of went through two relationships since the Kevin Samuels, since discovering Kevin Samuels. And with the first, it became really clear to me that the woman I was with and I wanted different things. Because the thought of having someone in my life, sure, that was great. But being financially responsible for someone else's kids was absolutely out of the question. And I was at a point where I was very comfortable in basically laying out, a plan to say, if what we're talking about is us spending time together, us going out together, our families kind of, joining up and being able to go on vacations and trips and all those sorts of things, together, I'm cool with that. But if you're talking about marriage, which is a financial obligation, hell no. I've spent my time building myself up, building my career up, building my finances up. And I didn't do all of that just to give it away to someone else and some woman who's got some other man's kids. That's not going to happen. Um, my legacy is my priority. And if a woman had my kid, my approach to her would be very different than if they don't. This was a woman who didn't, which was fine. You want to date and you don't want to have any more kids? That's perfect. I can get on that page. Just don't bug me about getting married to you because I don't see the point. There's no benefit in getting married to you to me. There's just all kinds of risk. And when you look at the divorce rates in America and you look at how many of those divorces are initiated by women, marrying a woman with kids is a big fat losing proposition unless you have a prenup. However, you don't need the prenup if you never go through with the marriage. So that became so much simpler. Um, I had another relationship start kind of towards the end, closer towards the end of last year. That one was with a Middle Eastern woman. I wasn't dating out, so to speak. I just wasn't exclusively dating in. Why should I bother with that? You know, if black women hate black men so much, fine. We can go off and find other women. Um, from on the dating spectrum, black men are actually a pretty good choice. Second most desired race of men to date in America, as reported by OKCupid and some of the research that they did on their platform. It was interesting to me that this one woman who's Middle Eastern, her attitudes towards dating me were entirely different than the attitudes of any of the black women that I've gone out with in the last couple of years. No marital pressure, no competition over who's worth more, who's achieved more, who's got the higher education. This is a woman who basically wanted to just have, who wanted to have fun, who wanted to enjoy spending time with me. And it was odd to think, hey, I've kind of forgotten what this was like. There's a pressure that you feel that I felt in dating black women. It was kind of this pressure to, they're coming in with a do you measure up kind of attitude towards things where they want to lay all these hoops out and see if you're going to jump through them. And things fall apart as you say, you know what? I don't need to jump through your hoops. And, you know, beyond just looking at all the hoops you have, did you ever stop to think that I've got expectations too? Things in those dates felt very imbalanced. So walking away from that and finding something that was so different and so much more fun than any of those dates had been, you know, was earth shattering. It helped me to say, why bother? Why bother? And this isn't tied to race per se. It's why bother dealing with someone who thinks that you owe them something? You're going out on a first date and they're laying out all of their expectations for what you owe them. This whole conversation seems to revolve around this whole idea about the prize. Are men the prize or women the prize? Somewhere along the lines, we seem to have lost our way with relationships, and people have forgotten that the relationship is the prize. And if you can find someone that helps you to build a strong relationship, that's what winning is. There's no woman that's worth sacrificing your dignity for. There's no man that's worth sacrificing your dignity for. The goal is you find a relationship where things work comfortably, where the goals make sense, where you can align on what you want and how you want to get there. And you can feel like you've got someone who's going to be on your team as you push for it. And we're definitely not there as a culture. We're definitely not there when you look at yeah, when you look at a lot of stats on relationships in the black community. You just realize that marriage in the black community is dying a slow death. Black women don't marry, um, as compared to other races. Much more likely to not be married. Much more comfortable having kids and not needing husbands for them. Presumably valuing their independence a bit more than the relationships and the husbands, which is a choice. It's not a judgment, but it's a choice. When you further reflect on the fact that our divorce rates are higher, given these higher divorce rates, it's interesting to see that our women are more likely to initiate divorces than other races. You end up with a situation where you say, why would I do this? It really doesn't seem to work. You're there's a high likelihood that you're going to want out, and that can have a huge negative impact on my finances. It's not a widely known fact, but it's census data. We're the only race that currently has a higher divorce rate than marriage rate. Not quite double, but it's getting up there. More marriages are ending than are starting every day. That will lead to the death of the nuclear black family. It's just a matter of time, unless we decide that we want to change that. We decide that relationships are worth fighting for. We decide that we are willing to take extreme measures to try to repair all of this damage that seems to exist, that prevents us from coexisting. Kevin Samuels ripped the band aid off of the wound and pointed at it. Said, you know what? This is the problem, and we have to do something about it, and we need to take more drastic steps. Soft shoeing, hand holding, coddling. No, we're done with all of that. Let's just start slapping people in the face with reality and forcing them to acknowledge that, you know what? At the rate you're going, you're going to die childless, no spouse, and at best, you're going to have a pet. And it's going to be your own fault because you're too stuck on yourself to ever step back and say there are things that you could fix. There are smarter choices you can make. So if you can't make the smarter choices, die by yourself and don't ask us to care. That's a rough thing to hear. But if the alternative is that, you're 60 and you're alone and you're just now realizing that you made the mistakes, well, that's a greater sin. We owe it to each other to hold each other accountable, to force these conversations, and hope that we can get to better results. So, in honor of Kevin Samuels, I just wanted to share kind of his impact on my life. What I would really love to see are more people who are coming out and sharing the impact he's had on their lives, because ultimately his mission was to improve these nuclear black families, and I want to make sure that that work doesn't die with Kevin. Let's let his memory and his legacy live on.